Welcome to this deep dive. And this one's really special because it's based on a source that you shared with us.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's this 1995 issue of the Assassination Chronicles. Have you heard of this publication before?
Well, absolutely, yeah. It's a treasure trove of information and theories about the JFK assassination.
It really is. And, flipping through this issue, it feels like you're stepping back in time,
Yeah.
like a time capsule from that era. And I'm really excited to kind of dive in with you and see what the JFK research community was focused on back then, 3 decades after the assassination.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see what was on their minds, what they were investigating, and especially through this lens of this particular publication.
Yeah, and what's so cool about this issue, it's not just like dry academic articles. There are letters to the editor.
Oh, yeah.
There are, kind of these glimpses into the lives of people who were still deeply affected by the assassination.
Absolutely. It's very much a community publication. It's people talking to each other, debating, sharing their thoughts and feelings.
Right. It's like you can feel the passion, the frustration, the search for answers just kind of pouring off the page.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you want to start? What jumped out at you when you were looking at this issue?
Well, I think the letters to the editor are always a good place to start. They really give you a sense of the pulse of the community at that time.
Yeah, let's dive into those.
Yeah.
What are some of the themes that emerged from these letters?
Well, one thing that's really striking is the level of distrust towards the government. Many of the letter writers express frustration with the continued secrecy surrounding the assassination,
Oh, yeah.
and this feeling that they're not getting the full story.
It's like the Warren Commission report. Even decades later, it just wasn't enough for a lot of people.
Right, they felt like there was still unanswered questions, loose ends, things that just didn't add up.
And this magazine, it seems like it provided a platform for those dissenting voices.
Absolutely. A space to share their theories, their evidence, and to connect with others who felt the same way.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about like hardcore evidence and analysis. Some of these letters are just incredibly personal,
Mm-hmm.
like people reflecting on where they were when they heard the news, how it impacted their lives, their kind of personal connection to JFK.
Yeah, and I think one of the most powerful letters in this issue is from Marina Oswald Porter.
Oh, wow. Lee Harvey Oswald's widow.
Exactly.
What does she have to say?
Well, she doesn't talk about conspiracy theories or anything like that.
Oh,
It's more of a reflection on the personal toll that the assassination took on her life.
oh, I see.
The constant scrutiny, the accusations, the feeling of being trapped in this historical whirlwind that she never asked for.
It's got to be tough to live with that kind of legacy, being
Yeah.
associated with one of the most infamous figures in American history.
Absolutely. And her letter really humanizes that experience, reminds us that beyond the political intrigue and the conspiracy theories, there were real people whose lives were shattered by this event.
Yeah. Right. And their lives continue to be affected by it, even decades later.
Yeah.
And, speaking of lives being changed by the assassination, this issue also covers the recent death of Perry Russo.
Oh, yes, Perry Russo.
He was a key witness in Jim Garrison's conspiracy trial against Clay Shaw.
Right, that was a huge case back in the late 60s.
It was, and Russo's testimony was incredibly controversial.
Oh, absolutely. Some people saw him as a credible witness, while others questioned his reliability and suggested that he'd been coerced or influenced by Garrison.
So even his death kind of reopens those old wounds and debates.
It does. It shows how the shadow of the assassination continued to linger and how it impacted the lives of those involved in a very real and tangible way.
And, one of the things that I found really interesting about this issue is the focus on the Assassination Records Review Board, the ARRB.
Oh, yes, the ARRB.
This board was created in the early 90s to collect and release all these government documents related to the assassination, kind of in response to that public demand for more transparency.
Right. There was a lot of pressure on the government to finally open up the files and let people see what they had been hiding for all those years.
Exactly. And this issue features an interview with Tom Samoluk, the ARRB press officer.
How interesting.
And he gives some pretty fascinating insights into the challenges that the board faced.
What kind of challenges?
Well, apparently they ran into a lot of resistance from agencies like the FBI and CIA.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, those agencies were very reluctant to release certain documents claiming national security concerns. But for a lot of researchers, it just fueled the suspicion that they were still hiding something.
Oh, absolutely. It plays right into that narrative of a cover-up.
Exactly. So even with this board dedicated to transparency, there was still this feeling that the full story wasn't being told.
Right. It's like that classic saying, trust but verify. Or maybe in this case, don't trust and keep digging.
Yeah, that seems to be the motto of a lot of these JFK researchers.
Absolutely. They were determined to get to the bottom of things no matter how long it took.
Cool. And, one of the things that struck me about this whole ARRB situation is that it reflects the broader climate of skepticism towards government institutions at that time, especially after Watergate in Vietnam.
Oh, absolutely.
People were questioning authority, demanding more accountability, and the JFK assassination kind of became a focal point for all those anxieties.
Right. It was like the symbol of everything that felt wrong with the system, the secrecy, the potential for abuse of power.
And that distrust, it seems to permeate a lot of the articles and letters in this issue.
It does. It's almost palpable. It's like they're saying, we're not going to take your word for it anymore. We're going to dig for the truth ourselves.
It's a fascinating glimpse into the mindset of that era, and I think it's still relevant today. This idea of questioning authority and demanding transparency.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in a world where information is so readily available.
Yeah, it's more important than ever to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives that are presented to us, and to seek out multiple perspectives.
And that's exactly what these JFK researchers were doing back in 1995.
Yeah. They weren't just passively accepting the official story. They were actively engaged in trying to piece together the truth, even if it meant challenging long-held assumptions and confronting uncomfortable realities.
And, speaking of challenging assumptions, this issue also has an article about Jackie Kennedy's interview with Theodore H. White shortly after the assassination, the one where she talked about Camelot.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic interview.
It is, and it's interesting to see how Jackie Kennedy, even in her grief, was so intentional about shaping her husband's legacy. She actively promoted that Camelot theme, wanting to elevate his presidency to this almost mythical status.
Right. She understood the power of storytelling and how it could shape public perception.
And she was incredibly effective. It's hard to think about JFK now without that image of a young, vibrant president presiding over this kind of golden age.
Exactly. It's a testament to her skill as a communicator and her understanding of how to create a lasting narrative.
And, it makes you wonder how much of Camelot was reality versus how much was carefully crafted mythology.
That's a great question, and I think it's something that historians and biographers continue to debate.
Right, but regardless of its accuracy, that Camelot myth has had a profound impact on how we remember JFK and his presidency.
Absolutely. It's become part of the collective memory, part of the story that we tell ourselves about America.
And it's a reminder that history is often as much about how we remember events as it is about the events themselves. And, while Jackie Kennedy was focused on crafting a legacy, there were plenty of others who were still trying to piece together what actually happened in Dallas.
Oh, yeah.
And this magazine is packed with articles that delve into all sorts of theories and evidence.
It's like a smorgasbord of JFK assassination research.
It really is. And you see articles examining every aspect of Lee Harvey Oswald's life, searching for clues, questioning his motives, exploring potential connections to others. Like one article dives into the possibility of Oswald being an FBI informant before the assassination.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty wild theory.
It is, and there's been a lot of debate about the evidence supporting that claim.
Right, but it shows you the length that some researchers were going to try and make sense of Oswald's role in the assassination.
Absolutely. They were looking for any possible explanation that could shed light on his motivations and his potential connections to other individuals or groups.
It's like everyone was trying to find their own piece of the puzzle, their own way of understanding this event that had such a profound impact on the world.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this issue of the Assassination Chronicles so fascinating. It captures that collective effort to grapple with the unknown, to seek answers, and to make sense of a tragedy that still haunts us today.
It's a reminder that history is not just a collection of facts and dates. It's a living, breathing thing that continues to shape our understanding of the world and ourselves. And I'm really excited to delve into more of these articles with you and see what other insights and perspectives we can uncover from this time capsule of JFK research.
Me too. It's a journey I'm glad we're taking together. And it wasn't just about Oswald. There's also an article that focuses on the testimony of missing Parkland Hospital witnesses, questioning whether their accounts were fully considered by the Warren Commission.
Wait, missing witnesses? What does that even mean?
It means there were doctors and nurses who were present in the trauma room when President Kennedy was brought in, but they were never interviewed by the commission.
That's crazy. Why wouldn't they want to hear from everyone who was there?
That's the million-dollar question. The article suggests that some of these missing witnesses might have had observations that contradicted the single bullet theory, which was, a key part of the Warren Commission's conclusion.
So it's like there were pieces of the puzzle that were deliberately left out.
It's certainly a possibility, and it just adds another layer to the suspicion and distrust surrounding the official narrative.
It's like even with all the evidence they did gather, if they're ignoring certain people, it makes you wonder what else they might have overlooked or downplayed.
Yeah, and it speaks to this broader issue of selective evidence gathering, focusing on the information that supports a particular conclusion while ignoring or dismissing anything that challenges it.
Right, and that's something that JFK researchers have been pointing out for decades.
Absolutely. They've been meticulously going through the documents, the testimonies, looking for those inconsistencies, those gaps in the official narrative.
And this issue of the Assassination Chronicles, it really highlights that commitment to digging deeper, to questioning everything.
And, speaking of questioning everything, there's another article in this issue that I think you'll find particularly interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's it about?
It focuses on those heavily redacted transcripts of the Warren Commission's meetings that were finally declassified and released, after years of being kept under wraps.
Ooh, those redacted transcripts are like catnip for conspiracy theorists.
You're telling me. This article, The Mysterious Deletions of the Warren Commission's Top Secret Transcript of January 22, 1964, it focuses on those deleted words and phrases, trying to decipher what might have been so sensitive that the government felt the need to keep it hidden for all those years.
It's like a historical puzzle, trying to fill in the blanks and figure out what's missing.
Exactly. The author, Helverb, he meticulously analyzes those deletions, comparing them to other sources, looking for patterns, trying to understand what the commission might have been discussing behind closed doors.
So did he find anything juicy?
Well, he points out some pretty interesting stuff. For instance, there's a quote from Senator Richard Russell, a member of the commission, who later admitted that he believed the commission had been misled by federal agencies, particularly when it came to Oswald's background and the ballistics evidence.
Wait, a member of the Warren Commission said that. That's huge.
It is, and it lends credence to the idea that there were layers to this story that were never fully explored, information that was deliberately withheld or manipulated to fit particular narrative.
It's like that saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you.
Exactly. And there are other intriguing quotes from commission members that Verb highlights in the article, like Alan Dulles, the former head of the CIA, is quoted as suggesting they destroy certain records related to Oswald's activities.
Okay, now that's just suspicious.
Right. It feeds into this suspicion that there was a concerted effort to control the narrative and suppress anything that didn't fit the official explanation.
So what are we left with? Was the Warren Commission a genuine attempt to uncover the truth? Or was it more about providing a conclusion that would appease the public and avoid further chaos?
It's a question that continues to be debated to this day, and honestly, there may never be a definitive answer. But that's part of what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about revisiting the past, it's about grappling with the ambiguity and uncertainty that surrounds this event, even decades later.
It's about acknowledging that history isn't always neat and tidy, that there are often more questions than answers.
Precisely. And speaking of unanswered questions, this issue also includes an article that takes a deep dive into the Parkland Hospital witnesses, particularly the ones who weren't called to testify before the Warren Commission.
We talked about the missing witnesses earlier. What's this article's take on them?
This article, Arlen Specter and the Missing Parkland Witnesses, it argues that there were inconsistencies and omissions in the Warren Commission's handling of the medical evidence. It specifically focuses on Arlen Specter, who at the time was assistant counsel for the commission and responsible for questioning the doctors who treated President Kennedy.
So what's the issue with Specter?
The author, Brad J. Parker, he contends that Specter failed to interview several key witnesses whose testimony could have challenged the official narrative, particularly regarding the nature and location of the president's wounds.
So he's saying Specter cherry-picked the witnesses to fit the story they were trying to tell.
That's the implication. Parker points out that while 15 physicians who were present in the trauma room were called to testify, 4 others were not, including Dr. Charles Crenshaw and Dr. Robert Grossman.
And why are those 2 doctors significant?
Because their observations might have contradicted the single bullet theory. Dr. Crenshaw believed that President Kennedy had been shot at least twice, and Dr. Grossman, who was a neurosurgeon, had a very detailed understanding of the skull defects, which could have challenged the official account of the bullet's trajectory.
So what's Parker's theory? Does he think Spector deliberately avoided interviewing these doctors?
He definitely raises that question. He even sent a letter to Senator Spector asking why these potentially crucial witnesses weren't called to testify.
And did Spector respond?
According to the article, as of the publication date, he hadn't.
So more unanswered questions, more fuel for the conspiracy fire.
Exactly. And it raises that tantalizing what-if question. What if those missing witnesses had been interviewed? What if their testimony had been given equal weight? Could it have changed the course of the investigation? Could it have altered the public's understanding of the assassination?
It's like a historical choose-your-own-adventure story.
Mm.
We'll never know what might have been if things had gone differently.
It's a reminder that even the most thorough investigations are limited by the information available, the questions asked, and the perspectives considered.
And it makes you wonder, are we just destined to keep debating this event forever? Will there ever be a point where we can definitively say, this is what happened, and put all the speculation to rest?
It's hard to say, but I think it's important to remember that history is an ongoing conversation, a process of discovery and reinterpretation that continues as new evidence emerges and new perspectives are brought to light.
It's like a giant puzzle that we're all trying to solve together, even if we don't always agree on where the pieces fit.
Exactly. And speaking of seeing things from different angles, this issue also draws a parallel between the JFK assassination and a more recent event, the Oklahoma City bombing, which had happened just a few months before this issue was published.
That's interesting. What's the connection?
The article parallels Oswald and McVeigh. It explores the similarities in the public's reaction to both events, particularly the focus on potential government cover-ups and the feeling that those in power were withholding crucial information.
So it's like the JFK assassination became a template for understanding events where the official narrative felt incomplete or suspicious.
Exactly. In both cases, there was the sense that the authorities weren't being fully transparent, that there were layers to the story that weren't being revealed.
It's like the JFK assassination created a lens through which we now view similar tragedies, always questioning, always seeking a deeper truth.
It's a reminder that historical events don't exist in isolation. They shape our understanding of the present and influence how we interpret subsequent events, often in ways we might not even realize.
It's all connected, a web of events and interpretations that shape our collective understanding of the world.
Precisely. And speaking of connections, this issue of the Assassination Chronicles also provides a glimpse into the vibrant community of researchers and enthusiasts who were still deeply engaged with the JFK assassination decades after the event.
You mean the folks who are poring over documents, analyzing photos, and debating theories in their spare time?
Exactly. We see articles that delve into specific pieces of evidence, like the badge man photo, which some believe shows a figure with a badge, or insignia consistent with a law enforcement officer firing from behind the grassy knoll.
Oh yeah, the badge man photo.
Yeah.
That's one of those pieces of evidence that really gets people fired up.
You're not kidding. And this article, Ed Hoffman versus Badgeman, it dives into the weeds of photo analysis, examining things like lighting, shadows, and potential image manipulation, which is, a huge topic of debate among JFK researchers at the time.
So is the Badgeman photo legit, or is it just a trick of the light?
That's the million-dollar question. The article presents a compelling case, but ultimately it comes down to interpretation. Even with advancements in technology, there's still room for debate when it comes to analyzing these types of images, but that's part of the fun, right? Trying to piece together the puzzle, examining every detail, searching for clues.
It's like being a historical detective.
Exactly. And speaking of trying to understand the mind of a potential assassin, there's another article in this issue that critiques Gerald Posner's portrayal of Lee Harvey Oswald in his book Case Closed.
Case Closed. That book was pretty controversial, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was. Posner argued that Oswald was a troubled loner with a history of mental instability, and that he acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy. This article, written by Dr. Samuel F. Kritzker, challenges that assessment.
So what's Kritzker's take?
He argues that Posner's analysis relies too heavily on outdated psychiatric terminology, and that he misinterprets Oswald's adolescent behavioral issues to fit a predetermined narrative.
So it's like he's saying Posner was trying to force Oswald into a box that didn't quite fit.
Exactly. Kritzker points out that while Oswald certainly had a difficult childhood and displayed signs of emotional instability, there's no evidence to suggest he was capable of the kind of premeditated violence that Posner attributed to him.
So if Oswald wasn't this cold-blooded killer that Posner made him out to be, what was he?
Kritzker suggests that Oswald might have been more susceptible to manipulation or influence from others, particularly those who might have exploited his desire for recognition or significance.
So instead of being a mastermind, he might have been a pawn in a larger game.
It's a possibility, and it highlights the dangers of oversimplifying complex historical figures, reducing them to labels like lone nut, without fully exploring the nuances of their personalities and motivations.
It's like that saying, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity.
Exactly. Sometimes the simplest explanation isn't the most accurate one. And speaking of exploring different possibilities, this issue of the Assassination Chronicles also includes an article that dives into a rather obscure but potentially significant detail. A mysterious 1961 Rambler station wagon that was reportedly seen in Dealey Plaza on the day of the assassination.
A Rambler station wagon, what's so special about a car?
Well, this article, The Rambler Oswald and the JFK Assassination, it presents evidence suggesting that this car might have played a role in the events of that day, potentially transporting Oswald or other individuals involved in the assassination.
Okay, now we're getting into some real conspiracy theory territory.
I know, right? But the author meticulously traces the car's history, from its alleged presence in Dealey Plaza to its subsequent appearances in Mexico, and ultimately its connection to a network of individuals with ties to Lyndon Johnson and the intelligence community.
Wait, hold on. Are we suggesting that Lyndon Johnson might have been involved in the assassination?
Whoa, let's not jump to conclusions. The article doesn't explicitly make that claim, but it does raise some intriguing questions about the car's potential role and its connections to powerful figures.
So what's the deal with this Rambler? What makes it so suspicious?
The author points out several things. First, the car was reportedly owned by a couple who lived near President Kennedy's vacation home in Palm Beach, Florida, which seems like an odd coincidence. Second, various witnesses described the car's license plates differently, with some claiming they were not the standard Texas plates. This discrepancy suggests that the car might have been outfitted with fake plates to avoid detection or to implicate Oswald.
It's like something out of a spy movie. Fake license plates, secret meetings, shadowy figures lurking in the background.
Right, it definitely adds a layer of intrigue to the story. And ultimately, the article concludes that the Rambler, with its mysterious appearances and connections to powerful figures, warrants further investigation.
It's like a breadcrumb trail leading us deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole.
Exactly. And sometimes it's those seemingly insignificant details that can lead to the most surprising discoveries.
You know, it's amazing how this issue manages to capture both the meticulous research and the kind of wild speculation that surrounds the JFK assassination.
Yeah, it's a real mix of hard evidence and intriguing possibilities. And it shows how this event continues to fascinate and perplex people even decades later.
It's a reminder that history is not a static thing. It's a dynamic process of interpretation and reinterpretation. And that there are always new perspectives to consider, new questions to ask.
Absolutely. And, speaking of new perspectives, there's one more article I want to touch on before we wrap.
Okay, lead the way.
It's about a British researcher named Walt Brown, who had this really interesting kind of personal connection to the assassination.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So Brown had been researching the assassination for years, and one day he has this chance encounter with a man named Warren Castor.
I don't recognize that name.
Well, Castor had lived in Dallas in 1963 and worked in a building overlooking Dealey Plaza.
No way. So he was there on the day of the assassination.
He was, and get this. Castor had originally planned to watch the presidential motorcade from his office window, but he had to travel out of town for a business meeting on that fateful day.
Wow, talk about a sliding doors moment.
I know, right? And here's where it gets even crazier. Castor told his friend, Roger Williams, that if he wanted to watch the motorcade, the 6th floor of the building offered the best view.
Oh my gosh, the Texas School Book Depository.
Exactly. The very place where Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly fired the fatal shots.
It's chilling to think how close Castor was to being a part of history, and how a simple twist of fate changed everything.
It really makes you think about all the what-ifs, and how these seemingly random occurrences can have such profound consequences.
So what happened to Castor after that? Did he ever talk about his experience publicly?
According to the article, Castor kept a pretty low profile after the assassination. He moved away from Dallas and didn't really talk about what he had witnessed or what he might have seen from that window if he had stayed in town.
Wow, I can't imagine living with that knowledge, knowing you were so close to a pivotal moment in history.
Right, and it makes you wonder how many other people out there have similar stories. untold perspectives on the assassination that we may never know about.
Okay, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive into the Assassination Chronicles. We've seen the raw emotion, the meticulous analysis, the challenges to the official narrative, and the unwavering dedication of researchers seeking the truth.
It's a testament to the enduring power of this event. Decades later, people were still poring over documents, analyzing photos, and debating theories. It clearly had a profound impact, not just on those who lived through it, but on subsequent generations as well.
It makes you wonder, what is it about the JFK assassination that continues to captivate us?
I think it speaks to something deeper than just a historical event. It represents a loss of innocence, a rupture in our collective understanding of the world. It shattered the illusion of American exceptionalism and forced us to confront the dark realities of power, secrecy, and violence that exist in our society.
It also makes us question our own relationship with history. How do we construct narratives? How do we assign blame? And how do we seek meaning in the face of tragedy?
This issue of the Assassination Chronicles reminds us that the search for truth, for understanding, and for justice is a journey that continues long after the headlines fade.
So, what does this all mean for you, our listener? Perhaps this deep dive sparked your own curiosity about the JFK assassination. Maybe you'll dig into those declassified documents yourself, or examine the evidence with fresh eyes. Or perhaps you're simply left with a sense of awe at the complexity of history and the enduring power of events that shape our world. Whatever it is, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the conversation alive. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's amazing how even a car can become a piece of this historical puzzle. But it's not all just serious analysis and intense investigations in this magazine. There's also an article about a British researcher named Walt Brown who had this crazy connection to the assassination.
Oh yeah, Walt Brown, his story. It really highlights how history can sometimes feel incredibly personal, even if you weren't directly involved in the event itself.
Tell me about it.
So Brown had been researching the assassination for years, and one day he had this chance encounter with a man named Warren Castor. Turns out, Castor had lived in Dallas in '63 and worked in a building overlooking Dealey Plaza. Yes, and get this. Castor had originally planned to watch the presidential motorcade from his office window, but had to travel out of town for a business meeting on that fateful day.
Well, talk about a sliding doors moment.
I know, right? And here's where it gets even crazier. Castor told his friend, Roger Williams, that if he wanted to watch the motorcade, the 6th floor of the building offered the best view.
Oh my gosh, the Texas School Book Depository?
Exactly. The very place where Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly fired the fatal shots.
It's chilling to think how close Castor was to being a part of history and how a simple twist of fate changed everything.
It really makes you think about all the what-ifs and how these seemingly random occurrences can have such profound consequences.
And it really speaks to the power of perspective, like we've been talking about all these different theories and interpretations of the assassination, and here's this guy who could have had a front row seat to the whole thing, but missed it because of a business trip.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, and, it makes you wonder how many other people out there have similar stories, untold perspectives on the assassination that we may never know about.
Right. It's like even though we're diving deep into this magazine from 1995, we're still just scratching the surface of this massive, multifaceted event.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes the JFK assassination so enduringly fascinating. It's a story with so many layers, so many unanswered questions, and it continues to invite us to explore, to investigate, to try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, and this issue of the Assassination Chronicles is a great example of that. It's not just about presenting a single definitive truth, but about showcasing the range of perspectives, theories, and research that was happening within the JFK community at that time.
Exactly. It's about the ongoing dialogue, the search for understanding, and the recognition that history is not a fixed narrative, but a constantly evolving conversation.
Okay, I think we've done a pretty thorough deep dive into this issue. We've talked about the letters to the editor, the ARRB, the missing Parkland witnesses, the redacted transcripts, the Badgeman photo, the Rambler station wagon, and even Walt Brown's chance encounter with Warren Castor.
It's been quite a journey, and I have to say it's been incredibly insightful to see how researchers were approaching the JFK assassination back in 1995.
Me too. It's given me a whole new appreciation for the depth and complexity of this event. And I think it's safe to say that the conversation about the JFK assassination is far from over.
Absolutely. And that's a good thing. It means we're still engaged, still questioning, still seeking answers.
So for you, our listeners, what did you take away from this deep dive? Does it challenge your assumptions about the JFK assassination? Did it spark your own curiosity to dig deeper? Or maybe it just left you with more questions than answers? Whatever it is, we hope this conversation has encouraged you to keep exploring history, keep questioning the narratives you encounter, and keep searching for your own understanding of the past. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.